or whose vessel was what, with some sort of arbitrary sign. So these are mnemonic devices. But now we come to the one that's most interesting of all, and these are tokens. This is the fourth group, and it's the fascinating group. Mesopotamia, with its northern and eastern border regions, abounds in this class of objects. And their relevance was found out sometime in the 1960s, but no one really understood what they meant. Excavation report after excavation report showed that they had been found all over Mesopotamia, but no one knew what to make of them. And in fact, if you go to the early excavation reports, you will always find them at the back of the report under small objects, meaning I don't have a clue what they mean, but I'll stick them in anyhow. So these tokens, as you can see, come into all sorts of shapes and sizes. They can be stone, they can be ceramic, circles with holes in them, and so on and so forth. And they are found all over the place. And as I said, archaeologists used to give them scant attention. Indeed, they often just threw them away, I hate to say, until the fellow up in the top right-hand corner, Pierre Armier, who works at the Louvre in Paris, realized that there was a pattern. And he started to look into it. And he started to build the theory, and it was then taken up by the person down in the right-hand, bottom right-hand corner, Denise Schmandt-Besserat. Now, what have these tokens got to do with writing? Well, let me outline what the theory is. And it runs something like this, that these tokens were used in a system of accounting. And they stood for units of goods. Now, this economic system is of a great age. In fact, it goes back to the 9th millennium BC. 9,000 or so BC, we start to see these tokens scattered all over throughout the Near East. Now, these shapes did not necessarily look like anything, but rather they were symbols. They were sort of used as credit for goods, a reminder that goods were sold or that payment was owed. For instance, if I was a merchant and you wanted to come and buy some wheat from me or sheep or goats, but you didn't have any money. So you gave me some of these tokens and I said, okay, here's your goods, and I put those tokens in a drawer, and when you've got the money you can come back and pay me. Fred comes up and his similar story, no money but I need this. Okay, tokens in this drawer, off he goes, and so on and so forth. You can see what's going to happen. After about a month or two of this, you're going to get awfully mixed up about who owes you what. You've got tokens rattling in this drawer, tokens rattling in that drawer, but they are all some sort of credit for goods, you see. Now, they were used as bills of freight, and in order to refrain from fraud, in order to put some sort of organization into these tokens, and this is the important thing, is that some of them were then inserted into balls of clay. Now, here's one example, and how do you know? You may well say, well, how do you know that? Well, there have been some marvellous discoveries, because mostly the tokens were found by themselves, these isolated tokens here and there. But every now and then, we actually find them in the clay balls. Now, this is an important discovery. In other words, what happened was that at some stage, around 3,200, 100, in order to make to organise all those tokens, someone decided that they're going to put them in a clay ball to sort of compartmentalise them, so to speak. But you can see what the problem was going to be. After a while, you're going to forget what is in the ball. You could rattle it and realise that there are tokens there, but you're going to forget. And so you've got the tokens in the ball, but you don't necessarily know what's in them, certainly after a few months or a few years. So what do? You start to impress the outside of the ball with the shape that is inside the ball. So here you have some, what do we call bullae, with tokens that with impressions on the outside. You can see them, long, elongated shapes, circular shapes. There are others with rectangular shapes and so on. And we have found these tokens inside bulls with these markings also on the outside. There's the link. Tokens, tokens in bulls, tokens in bulls with marks. Now, the next obvious thing, of course, would be, well, why the heck have I got this encasing in the first place? And what we find is the next stage, which is the emergence of little flat clay tablets that look like that. Now, effectively, what those tablets are is a flattened version of those clay balls that I showed you before, with the impressions of those tokens. Now, we have found quite a number of these type of tablets, and I'll show you a few more. Here are these, ladies and gentlemen, are the earliest clay tablets that we have found. Now, this is not writing yet, but it foreshadows what I'll show you in a minute. So we have impressed tablets with circles, with strokes, and so on, that represent the shapes of these tokens that have a very long history. And here is another one. Now, the difference between this one that I showed you and this one here, of course, is that what you start to see are pictures. And you not only have circles and lines, but you also have little pictures, one that looks like a head there, others that look like jars, and so on and so forth. Now, so is this then how writing was invented? You have token types on the left-hand side, and you have pictographs that they developed into on the right-hand side. Now, from a technical point of view, there seems little doubt, and I think most would agree, that what I've just explained is the evolution of a writing system. And the evolution in practice and function of a generalized token system that led to these mnemonic devices being used, and that indeed they were basically accounting tablets. Because as I'll show you in a minute, a lot of these signs and symbols that were first recorded on these tablets, and indeed on the outside of these clay balls, were numbers. But there's something missing, isn't there? There's something lacking. So what's missing here? The token system does not imply a notation of grammar. It doesn't have syntax. How can you go from something that looked like the tablets I showed you to an actual sophisticated writing system? And here is where a discovery that wasn't made that long ago comes into play by a person working on these tablets, Melinda Green. What she showed, and I'll just show you this again, because there are the tokens that I've mentioned. You saw some of the pictographs, which are on the left-hand side, the second column, which I'll come back to, and eventually they transformed into the various cuneiform signs. But what has been found out since is something very interesting. Now, here's a more developed version of the tablets that I showed you before. Now, you can see how quite complex this early tablet, still dated to 3100, I might add, is. First of all, you have a lot of little holes. Then you have a number of pictographs, and they're all in some sort of order. Now, what was found by looking at these early tablets is that the repertoire of signs in this very early period was far greater than, in fact, the cuneiform signs later on. There were a huge number of pictographs that were being used. Just about everything they saw had a little picture and was put on these clay tablets. And this illustrates that the proliferation of signs was felt to be too cumbersome, too problematic to really be a writing system. And in fact, what we find is that it tapered off much more later on. In fact, what we find is that this system started to reduce down to basically 3 signs. These 3 signs here account for about 600 Akkadian logographs. So different combinations of these 3 signs, you get other 3 signs that combine to make the Mesopotamian writing system. But let's go back to that early, tablets. The one thing that Melinda Green noticed, because she was grappling with this problem of how do you go from something that looks so simple to something that should be so complex. She noticed compartments. Can you see the compartments? There are boxes. There's a line and a box, a line and a box, and line and so on. Now, this division, this arrangement in boxes, do 2 things. They make visible the format of the text, so it makes it more readable. And within the boxes, the arrangement and the sequence of signs becomes much more focused. So, by dividing the tablet into these grid fashion, into a series of boxes, suggests an important step had been made, a very important step, not just at the signs, with the signs themselves, but also in their meaning. What the scribe that was doing when he wrote this was to say, look, focus on the boxes. And by focusing on the boxes, he was actually saying, let's get some syntax going. So in other words, you read this from top down like that. Otherwise, it would be a jumble of signs and you wouldn't know where to start. So the next big step in writing in Mesopotamia was to arrange the signs in boxes so that you read each box at a time. Simple though it may be, it gave them a sense of syntax. A really important step. Now, here is another one of these early cuneiform tablets, and you can see how very clear the boxes are. You can see the holes, which are numbers. I'll get to those in a second. You can see the pictographs, and also you can sort of make out the arrangement, as it were, of ideas. And as I said, this is not a historical text. It's not a mythological one. It's a simple accounting spreadsheet. This is your Mesopotamian version of your spreadsheet. And what you have then are more and more of these early tablets. So compare this one to the ones I showed you just before. You can see how it is starting to develop into something that is more sophisticated and complex. So then, looking at the development of cuneiform, we can say that, first of all, we do start with pictures, that those pictures are then arranged in boxes to give them meaning and to try and get some syntax and grammar. And then because, of course, because these were supposed to be expedient ways of recording things, you're not going to sit there and draw your way through a language. You had to become, it had to be a much more efficient way of doing things. What we find is that these pictures then started to reduce down into this cuneiform sign, using that stylus I showed you early on. And once you get down to the Babylonian version down there, the scribes found it quite sufficient to record even the most complex of ideas. Now, so far I've been talking about words, but the fact is that many, as I said, many of these tablets actually record numbers, not just words, but numbers. And you can see the coloured bits here, the things that look like circles and cones, are in fact numbers. Now, the numerical system used by the Sumerians and those who followed them in Mesopotamia is a combination of decimal and counting in tens and also counting in 60s. And the symbols used were large and small cones and circles. Single objects were represented as a small circle, as a small cone, and 10 objects as a small circle. So if you look at this, over there on the top, in the right-hand place, you've got number 1, that small cone, which is this one over here. And 10 small cones equals a circle, which is number 10. And 6 circles equals a large cone, which is the number 60. And then you have 10 of those, and so on. Okay? So it's based on a combination of decimals and 60s. So then, let's summarize what we've got so far. So we've got here an early recording system used in Mesopotamia, not to produce myths or historical events. These were to come later. At this time, when these tablets were being written, myths and historical events were recorded orally, transmitted orally. So in this very early period then, there was the need of economic accountability. That's what they really wanted to do. And why did they want to do that? Because cities in Mesopotamia were growing. There was a lot of trade between South Mesopotamia and North Mesopotamia. Goods were coming in and out in cities that looked like the one I showed you before. And in order to keep track of all this material, there had to be an accounting system that didn't rely on memory. And so this is how writing began, ladies and gentlemen, in Mesopotamia. To allocate responsibility for goods that were imported and exported, and to keep accounts of these transactions. Now, let's just go a step further, and I'll finish up on this. In both cuneiform and hieroglyphic, the invention relatively quickly led to more general applications and specific refinements or adaptations. And this evolution, which is partly mixed with the invention itself, has 4 aspects. And I don't want to deal with them now. Suffice to say that, of course, once you have language, you are emancipated from the system of symbols and tokens. And this emancipation, of course, is implied in the transition from a purely administrative language, which is the one that I've been talking about, because they are the earliest documents we have, to a language system that has linguistic notations and so on. And the motif, this transition of language, the adoption of language, I think is splendidly illustrated in an episode from a Sumerian poem called Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratar. And let me give you the gist of it before we read a passage out of it.